In Top Gun, Val Kilmer barely had to speak to own the room. As Iceman, he could cut through a scene with a look, a pause, a half-smile that seemed to say everything before a single word arrived. He was cool, controlled, almost untouchable, the kind of movie star Hollywood loved because he looked like confidence itself. Then, decades later, he came back. In Top Gun, Maverick, Val Kilmer returned as Iceman, but the silence around him felt different. It was no longer the silence of a young pilot who knew he was the best. It was the silence of a man whose real voice had been changed by illness, surgery, and years of fighting to be heard again. For a generation of viewers, that short scene was not just nostalgia. It was a goodbye they did not fully understand yet. Val Kilmer died in 2025 at the age of 65 after years of health struggles following throat cancer. The official reports said pneumonia. But the deeper tragedy, the part that made his final years so haunting, was not only that Hollywood lost another star. It was that Val Kilmer, an actor whose presence had once been built on voice, face, danger, charm, and total control, had already lost something the camera could not easily hide: his voice. And for an actor like Kilmer, a voice is never just sound. It is identity, it is rhythm, it is seduction, it is threat. It is how a performer enters a room before the body even moves. It is how a line becomes memory. Kilmer had made a career out of characters who seemed to possess some private code. Iceman in Top Gun, Jim Morrison in The Doors, Doc Holliday in Tombstone, Bruce Wayne in Batman Forever, Chris Shiherlis in Heat. They were not all alike, but they all carried the same strange Kilmer quality: beauty with distance, confidence with a shadow, a man who seemed to be hiding something even when the script did not say he was. Hollywood knew how to sell that. It sold him as the beautiful rebel, the difficult genius, the cold rival, the dangerous romantic. The actor with a face made for close-ups and a voice that could make arrogance feel elegant. But behind that image was a man harder to simplify. Some people in Hollywood called him intense. Some called him difficult. Some saw ego. Others saw discipline, devotion, and an actor who cared too much to be easy. For years, the public version of Val Kilmer stayed trapped somewhere between admiration and accusation. He was the star everyone remembered, but not always the man everyone understood. Then the story changed, not because of a scandal, not because of a fall from grace in the usual Hollywood way, not because the audience stopped loving the old image. It changed because his own body began to take away the instrument he had used to perform, to argue, to charm, to resist, and to remain himself. After throat cancer and the treatments that followed, Kilmer's speech was permanently altered. Communication became harder. Public appearances became different. The old movie star illusion could no longer protect him in quite the same way. And yet, this is where the story becomes more than an obituary. Because Val Kilmer did not simply disappear into silence, he tried to find another way back into the conversation. Through footage he had recorded across decades. Through the documentary Val, through the voice of his son Jack, reading his father's words. Through digital tools that tried to recreate what illness had changed. And finally, through one brief, devastating return as Iceman in Top Gun, Maverick. That scene lasted only a few minutes, but it carried the weight of an entire career. The man who once needed so few words to seem invincible now made the audience feel everything because speaking had become difficult. The character who had once represented control now carried the visible cost of time. And the actor who had spent his life becoming other people had to face the most painful role of all, appearing as himself, changed, vulnerable, and still unmistakably Val Kilmer. That is the question at the center of his story. What remains of a movie star when the face is older, the body is fragile, the voice is changed, and Hollywood can no longer sell the same illusion? For Val Kilmer, the answer was not simple. It was hidden in the distance between Iceman's silence and Val's silence. Between the legend on the screen and the man behind it. Between the voice audiences remembered and the voice he had to fight to recover. And to understand why that final comeback felt so powerful, we have to go back to the beginning, before the illness, before the comeback, before the digital voice. Before the public farewell to the young actor who entered Hollywood with talent, beauty, ambition, and a kind of intensity the industry would never quite know how to handle. Before Hollywood turned Val Kilmer into Iceman, he was not built like the usual movie star fantasy. He was born in Los Angeles, close enough to the industry to feel its gravity, but not so close that fame seemed guaranteed. The city around him was full of screens, studios, and myth-making, but Kilmer's earliest path was not simply toward celebrity. It was toward performance as something serious, almost sacred. Before he became a face on posters, he wanted to be an actor in the older sense of the word, someone trained, tested, disciplined, and transformed by the work. That difference matters. Because the public would later look at Val Kilmer and see the obvious things first: the blonde hair, the sharp jawline, the arrogant smile, the kind of beauty that made casting directors imagine him as a rival, a rebel, a romantic threat. But if that was all he had been, his story would be much smaller. Kilmer came into acting with a hunger that was not only about being seen, it was about being taken seriously. At Chatsworth High School in the San Fernando Valley, he began moving toward performance at an age when most people are still trying to decide who they are. Acting gave him a way to become someone else, but it also gave him a way to sharpen himself. He was not simply drifting toward fame because he was handsome. He was studying the craft, listening to language, watching how a body could change when a character entered it. And there was already loss in the background. Kilmer's childhood was not the clean, untouched origin story that Hollywood often prefers. His parents divorced when he was young. His family life carried its own fractures, and as a teenager, he experienced a devastating blow when his younger brother Wesley died. It was not the kind of wound that could be turned into a simple explanation for a career. Real grief is rarely that tidy. But it did add a shadow to the young man who would later become famous for playing men with shadows. The public would see confidence. The private material was more complicated. That is often how Hollywood begins its oldest trick. It takes a person with wounds, contradictions, and private memories, then turns them into an image clean enough to sell. For Kilmer, the first real door did not open through a studio lot. It opened through training. At 17, he was accepted into Juilliard's drama division, one of the most respected acting programs in the country. That detail is easy to mention and move past, but it says something essential about him. Juilliard was not a factory for casual fame. It was a place of discipline, theater, pressure, voice work, movement, text, and ego stripped down under instruction. For a young actor, it could be both a proving ground and a warning. If Hollywood rewards image, Juilliard demands control. Kilmer entered that world as one of its youngest students, and he did not arrive as a relaxed future celebrity waiting to be discovered. He arrived with ambition. He wanted the stage. He wanted language. He wanted roles that required more than good lighting. Long before audiences would remember him leaning against a locker room wall in Top Gun, Kilmer was learning how to carry a line, how to hold silence, how to make a character feel lived in before the camera came close. That early seriousness would become one of his great strengths. It would also become one of the things Hollywood did not always know how to handle. Because Kilmer was not built to be an obedient ornament, he did not seem interested in simply standing where the studio placed him and looking beautiful on command. There was a restless intelligence in him, a need to push against the obvious version of a role. That kind of intensity can make an actor memorable. It can also make him difficult to package. The first sign of this strange split came before the big heroic image. Kilmer's early screen breakthrough was not as a brooding leading man, but in comedy. In Top Secret, he showed a lightness that later audiences sometimes forgot he had. The film was absurd, fast, and ridiculous in the best way, but Kilmer did not treat it as disposable. Even inside parody, he carried himself like a performer who understood rhythm. He could sing, move, hold the frame, and make foolishness look strangely precise. It was a clue. Val Kilmer was never only one thing. He could be funny, but not harmless. Beautiful, but not soft. Serious, but not simple. He had the kind of face Hollywood could use immediately, and the kind of ambition that made him harder to use casually. Then came the role that changed everything. In 1986, Top Gun turned aerial combat, male rivalry, sunglasses, and military glamour into pure pop mythology. Tom Cruise was the center of the film's heat, but Val Kilmer, as Tom Iceman Kazansky, became the cold edge of it. He was the rival who did not need to chase attention because attention came to him. He smiled as if he already knew the ending. He spoke with clip control. He made arrogance feel like strategy, and in that moment, Hollywood found an image it could sell. The young actor who had trained for the stage became the face of a new kind of screen confidence. Not loud, not desperate, not openly wounded, just cool enough to seem untouchable. But that was the first trap, because once an audience believes an actor is untouchable, it becomes harder for them to see the person underneath. And once Hollywood learns how to sell one version of a man, it does not always ask whether that version is true. For Val Kilmer, Top Gun was not only a breakthrough, it was the beginning of a public identity that would follow him for the rest of his life. The world had met Iceman, but it had not yet understood Val. After Top Gun, Val Kilmer had something Hollywood values almost more than talent. He had an image, not just recognition, not just a successful film, an image. The kind that could be reduced to a look, a posture, a memory. He had become the man who could stand next to Tom Cruise and still refuse to disappear. The rival with the perfect smile. The pilot who made confidence look cold. The actor whose silence seemed louder than another man's speech. That image was powerful, but it was also incomplete. Hollywood often loves a performer most when it can simplify him. It takes one role, one gesture, one public impression, and builds a cage out of admiration. For Kilmer, the cage was coolness. He was Iceman, and the industry understood what to do with that. Make him handsome, make him controlled, make him dangerous enough to want, but not strange enough to confuse the audience. The problem was that Kilmer was much stranger, deeper, and more restless than that image allowed. He did not move through the next years like a man satisfied with being a poster. He kept choosing roles that tested how far his screen presence could stretch. The beauty was still there, the charm was still there, but he seemed drawn to characters who carried damage underneath the surface, men who were not simply confident, but haunted by something they could not easily name. That was why the doors mattered. When Kilmer played Jim Morrison, he was not just playing a famous singer. He was stepping into a myth already overloaded with memory, worship, and self-destruction. Morrison had a voice that people remembered like a spell, a stage presence that turned performance into danger, a life that had already become legend before it could be fully understood. For Kilmer, the role demanded more than resemblance. It demanded surrender. He had to sing, move, speak, and inhabit the rhythm of a man whose own voice had become part of American rock mythology. It was a performance built on sound as much as appearance, and that becomes almost painful to look back on now. Because years later, when Kilmer's own voice would be changed by illness, the doors would stand as one of the clearest reminders of what his voice once carried: force, texture, command, and the ability to make another person's legend feel alive again. But the role also sharpened something in the way people saw him. Val Kilmer was not only beautiful, he was intense. That word followed him, sometimes as praise, sometimes as a warning. Intense meant committed. It meant unpredictable. It meant he might go further into a role than the production expected. It meant the performance could feel alive in ways that made people watch. But in Hollywood, intensity is only admired when it stays convenient. Kilmer's greatest roles often lived in that tension. In Tombstone, he played Doc Holliday, a dying gunfighter with wit, elegance, and a body already marked by decline. The role could have been a side character, a stylish accent in a western full of men with guns and reputations. But Kilmer turned Doc into something more fragile and more memorable. He gave him humor, danger, sickness, loyalty, and a voice that seemed to float between charm and exhaustion. There was a strange prophecy in that performance. Doc Holliday was a man whose body was failing but whose presence had not surrendered. He could be weak and magnetic in the same breath. He could look near death and still own the room. Audiences loved the performance because Kilmer made decline feel elegant without making it harmless. Years later, that performance would echo differently. The public did not know it at the time, but one day Val Kilmer himself would become a man whose body had changed, whose voice had been altered, and whose presence still carried the memory of power. What had once been acting would later feel like a shadow cast forward. Then came Batman Forever. By the mid-1990s, Kilmer had reached the kind of stardom that turns an actor into a brand. Playing Bruce Wayne meant entering one of the most famous masks in popular culture. Batman was not just a character. He was a machine of expectation. The suit, the mythology, the studio pressure, the public comparison, all of it came with the role. For a moment, Kilmer became the face of one of Hollywood's biggest franchises. But even there, the same split appeared. Bruce Wayne was another man divided between image and wound. Public elegance, private damage. A polished surface hiding something unresolved underneath. On paper, it was almost too perfect for Kilmer. He understood distance. He understood masks. He understood how a man could be watched by everyone and still remain unreachable. And yet, the more famous he became, the harder it became for Hollywood to decide what he was. Was he a leading man? A character actor trapped in a leading man's face? A movie star? A theater actor who had wandered into blockbuster machinery? A disciplined performer? A difficult one? A romantic hero? A threat to the smoothness of the set? The answer was never clean. That uncertainty gave him power on screen, but it complicated his career off screen. Audiences could feel there was more behind the image, but the industry often prefers an actor who can be summarized quickly. Kilmer resisted easy summary. Sometimes that resistance made his performances richer. Sometimes it made the stories around him louder than the work itself. He'd offered another kind of image. In Michael Mann's crime world, Kilmer did not need to dominate every scene to be remembered. He became part of a colder, sharper vision of Los Angeles, a city of men who live by codes they may not survive. Again, he played someone controlled on the outside, pressured underneath, moving through a world where professionalism could not protect anyone from loss. By then, a pattern had formed. Val Kilmer's best-known characters were men built out of control. Pilots, singers, gunfighters, billionaires, criminals, men with style, men with secrets, men who knew how to perform strength even when something inside them was cracking. That was the image Hollywood sold. A beautiful man with a dangerous edge, a star who could make arrogance seductive, a performer who seemed to belong to the camera, but never fully to the system around it. But every image has a cost. And for Kilmer, the cost was not only that people misunderstood him, it was that they began to treat the misunderstanding as the whole story. The roles grew larger. The reputation grew louder. The distance between the actor and the image widened. The world saw confidence. The work revealed fracture. And behind the glamour of the 1980s and 1990s, another story was beginning to form, not yet the story of illness, not yet the story of losing his voice, but the story of a man Hollywood wanted to use, admire, and contain, while never quite knowing how to live with the full force of him. Before illness changed Val Kilmer's voice, another kind of noise had already begun to surround him. It was the noise of reputation. In Hollywood, a reputation can become its own character. It enters rooms before the actor does. It changes how people describe a performance, how journalists frame a career, how directors remember a set, and how audiences interpret a silence. For Kilmer, the word that kept returning was difficult. Sometimes it meant serious. Sometimes it meant demanding. Sometimes it meant hard to manage. Sometimes it was simply the industry's way of describing an actor who did not behave like a product. The truth was not as clean as the label. Kilmer was not the first actor to be called difficult, and he would not be the last. Hollywood has always had a complicated relationship with performers who ask too much of a role, push too hard against the expected version of themselves, or refuse to make the machine feel comfortable. If the work is brilliant, that intensity can be called genius. If the production is stressful, the same intensity can be called trouble. Val Kilmer lived in that narrow space between admiration and frustration. To the public, the story was easy to flatten. He was the handsome star with the ego, the actor who burned too hot, the man who became difficult to cast. It was a tempting version because it sounded dramatic, and because it made the later shape of his career seem simple, but it was not simple. The same qualities that made Kilmer magnetic on screen could make him complicated off-screen. He brought pressure into roles. He wanted meaning inside images that Hollywood sometimes treated as surfaces. He did not always seem willing to separate the job from the art, or the role from the emotional seriousness he brought to it. That could make him unforgettable. It could also make him exhausting. And for a while, the industry did what it often does when it does not know how to explain a person. It turned complexity into a label. Difficult. The label followed him through the 1990s. It attached itself to stories about productions, directors, co-stars, and sets. Some accounts were sharper than others. Some collaborators criticized him. Others defended him or remembered him with affection. The point is not to pretend the reputation never existed. It did. It became part of the public conversation around him. But the danger is letting that word become the whole man. Because once Hollywood decides an actor is difficult, every gesture can be read as proof. A disagreement becomes arrogance, perfectionism becomes ego, silence becomes hostility, intensity becomes instability. And suddenly the public is no longer watching the work. They are watching the myth around the work. Kilmer knew what it meant to be turned into a story. He had played men trapped inside images before. Jim Morrison turned into a rock god before he could remain human. Bruce Wayne, hiding a wound behind money and elegance. Doc Holliday, wearing wit like armor while his body declined. Again and again, Kilmer gravitated toward men whose public surfaces concealed something more wounded, more restless, more difficult to name. Maybe that is why his own public image became so strange. He looked like a Hollywood leading man, but he did not always move like one. He had the face of someone the industry could sell easily, but the temperament of someone harder to package. He could be glamorous without seeming simple. He could be charismatic without seeming open. He could attract the camera while still withholding part of himself from it. That withholding became part of his power. It also became part of the misunderstanding. By the late 1990s and beyond, the distance between the public idea of Val Kilmer and the working actor underneath had grown wide. The roles continued, but the old momentum changed. The large studio image did not hold the same way. Hollywood still knew his name, still remembered his face, still carried the echo of Iceman, Morrison, Doc Holliday, and Batman. But the industry that once seemed eager to shape him into a major star no longer seemed to know exactly where to place him. And that is one of the quieter costs of fame. Not the dramatic fall, not the scandal headline, not the sudden disappearance. The slower thing. The moment when the image built around you becomes too heavy to keep wearing, but too famous to escape. Kilmer's career did not end. He kept working. He kept appearing in films. He kept returning to characters, experiments, and projects that showed flashes of the actor people had first noticed. But the public conversation around him had shifted. His name carried memory, but also baggage. His beauty was no longer the new discovery. His old intensity was no longer always treated as promise. Hollywood likes a comeback story, but it is less patient with an actor who changes shape before the comeback arrives. And Val Kilmer was changing long before the world understood why. That is what makes this part of his story important. The private storm before the illness was not simply about temperament or reputation. It was about control. Who controlled the image? Who controlled the story? Who got to decide whether intensity was art or ego? Who got to turn a complicated man into a convenient label? Kilmer had spent his career playing men who used performance as protection. On screen, he could control a pause, a stare, a line. He could make silence feel chosen. He could make distance feel like strength. But in real life, control was already slipping. Not yet through the body, not yet through the voice. Not yet through the illness that would make communication itself difficult. At first, it slipped through narrative. The industry began telling a story about him. And like so many Hollywood stories, it was partly true, partly exaggerated, and far too small for the person inside it. Then came the deeper fracture, because the cruelest twist in Val Kilmer's life was not that people had called him difficult when he still had a voice to answer back. It was that, years later, when his body began to change, answering back would become harder than anyone could have imagined. The deepest fracture in Val Kilmer's story did not arrive with a headline about a film set. It arrived inside his own body. For years, the public had watched him through images that seemed almost impossible to weaken. Iceman with his perfect control, Jim Morrison with his dangerous rhythm, Doc Holliday joking at the edge of death, Batman behind the mask. Even when Kilmer's career changed, even when the studio spotlight moved on to other faces, the memory of him remained sharp. He belonged to that rare group of actors whose presence could survive long gaps, uneven choices, and changing eras. But illness does not negotiate with an image. When Kilmer faced throat cancer, the fight was not only medical. It became artistic, personal, almost symbolic. Treatments helped him survive, but they changed the instrument he had spent his life refining. His speech was altered. His voice became difficult. A tracheostomy affected the way he communicated. The sound that had carried arrogance, humor, seduction, anger, and delicacy through decades of performance no longer came out the way audiences remembered it. For any person, that would be a devastating change. For an actor, it cut deeper, because a voice is not just how an actor speaks. It is how he controls time. It is how he shapes a room. It is how he makes a pause feel intentional. It is how he turns one line into something unforgettable. A movie star can age and still remain a movie star. A face can change and still carry history. But when a voice changes, something more private is exposed. The body tells the truth before the image is ready. Kilmer had spent his career playing men who seemed to choose silence. Iceman's silence was strategy. Bruce Wayne's silence was secrecy. Doc Holliday's silence was sometimes exhaustion, sometimes wit waiting for its moment. On screen, silence had been a tool he controlled. After his illness, silence became something else. It became a barrier, a reminder, a space where speech used to move freely. Public appearances changed. Interviews changed. The ease of the old Hollywood exchange was gone. It was no longer possible to pretend that the man from the posters had simply stepped out of the frame and remained untouched somewhere off camera. Time had reached him. Illness had reached him. And it had reached him in the place where his art and his identity met. That is why the later years of Val Kilmer cannot be told as a simple decline. He was not just a star fading from the center of the industry. He was a performer trying to live after one of performance's most intimate tools had been taken away. And in that struggle, something unexpected happened. The old need for control did not disappear. It changed form. Kilmer had spent much of his life recording himself. He had saved footage, moments, fragments, backstage pieces, family images, rehearsals, private glimpses, and evidence of a life lived close to the camera. For another actor, that archive might have seemed like vanity. For Kilmer, it became something more complicated. It was a way of holding on to his own version of events, a way of refusing to let other people reduce him to a rumor, a role, or a reputation. When his voice became harder to use, that archive became even more powerful. It allowed him to speak through memory. The documentary Val did not feel like a standard career recap because it was built from inside the life it was examining. It was not simply the story of an actor others remembered. It was the story of a man who had been watching himself for decades, sometimes with curiosity, sometimes with ego, sometimes with tenderness, sometimes with pain. And because his own speaking voice had changed so much, the film carried another emotional layer. His words were heard through the voice of his son, Jack. That choice could have felt like a device. Instead, it felt like a wound and a gift at the same time. A son giving sound to his father's words, a family member helping preserve the rhythm of a man whose own voice no longer moved as it once had. The effect was not sentimental in a cheap way. It was intimate because it made the loss impossible to ignore without turning Kilmer into an object of pity. The film asked the audience to listen differently, not to the old star voice, not to the clean myth, not to the gossip around the difficult actor, but to a man trying to explain himself after the public had spent years explaining him without enough room for contradiction. And that is where the later years become the emotional center of the story. After the applause got quieter, after the roles changed, after the industry stopped treating him as the inevitable leading man of the next decade, Kilmer still had a story to tell, but he had to tell it through different tools. Through footage, through writing, through family, through technology, through presence, even when speech was hard. Hollywood often treats a changed body as the end of a star's usefulness. But for Kilmer, the changed body became the beginning of a different kind of visibility. The glamorous image had cracked. The old coolness could no longer protect him. But what came through the crack was not emptiness. It was a more vulnerable, more human version of the performer audiences thought they already knew. That is what made his later return as Iceman so powerful. By the time Top Gun Maverick arrived, audiences were not seeing the same Val Kilmer they had seen in 1986. They were seeing the years between those two images. The young rival who could command a scene with a smirk had become a man whose real life had placed silence around him in a completely different way. The film did not need to explain all of that. The audience could feel it. The scene was brief. The words were few. The emotion was controlled. But beneath it was the whole story of a man who had once seemed untouchable and had become, in public, visibly touched by time. That was not a conventional comeback. It was something quieter, a return without denial, a farewell without announcing itself as one. A moment where the character and the actor seemed to meet in the same fragile space. Val Kilmer did not return to prove he was unchanged. He returned changed, and that made the moment matter more. 1.5. Because after the spotlight, after the myth, after the reputation, after the illness, the question was no longer whether Hollywood could still sell Val Kilmer as the perfect image. The question was whether the world could finally listen to him without needing the image to be perfect. Behind every movie star, there is a smaller circle of people who do not experience fame as an image. They experience it as distance, as absence, as pressure, as a name that belongs to the world before it belongs completely to the family. They know the version of the person that never fits inside a poster. They see the exhaustion after the performance, the moods after the applause, the silences no camera was meant to catch. For Val Kilmer, that circle mattered more in the later years than it had ever mattered before. Because when his voice changed, the people closest to him became part of how the world could still hear him. Kilmer had been married to actress Joanne Whaley, and together they had 2 children, Mercedes and Jack. That part of the story should not be turned into gossip. It does not need to be dressed up with speculation or made into a melodrama about private love. The deeper point is simpler and more important. Val Kilmer was not only a screen presence, he was someone's father. And in the last chapters of his public life, that fact became inseparable from the way his story was told. In the documentary Val, the audience does not simply hear about Kilmer from critics, co-stars, or old headlines. They hear his own words. But those words are carried by his son, Jack. That choice gives the film its quiet ache. The voice is not Val's old voice, not the one audiences remembered from Top Gun, Tombstone, The Doors, or Heat. It is his son's voice, speaking his father's reflections back into the world. There is something almost unbearably intimate in that arrangement. A son becomes the vessel for a father's voice. Not because the father has nothing left to say, but because saying it has become harder. That is the emotional center of this part of Kilmer's story. It is not only that illness changed his speech, it is that family became part of the bridge between the man and the audience. Jack's narration does not erase the loss. It makes the loss more visible. Every sentence carries 2 presences at once: the father who wrote or shaped the words, and the son who gives them sound. The result is not a standard Hollywood tribute. It feels closer to an act of care. For decades, Kilmer had been surrounded by cameras. Studio cameras, press cameras, fans cameras, cameras that captured the image Hollywood wanted to sell. But he had also been filming his own life, collecting pieces of himself across the years: home movies, behind-the-scenes fragments, private moments, rehearsals, records of a man trying to hold on to his own version of the story. When Val was released, that archive became more than footage. It became testimony. It showed a man who had spent much of his life being watched, but who had also been watching back. A man aware, perhaps more than most, of how easily Hollywood can flatten a person into a role. The handsome one, the intense one, the difficult one, the fading one, the sick one. The film pushed against those reductions, and Jack's voice helped it do that. Not by pretending the old Val was unchanged, not by covering the evidence of illness, not by restoring him into a flawless image, but by allowing the audience to sit with the contradiction. The voice was different, the body had changed, the myth had cracked, and yet the person had not disappeared. Mercedes Kilmer, too, belongs to this quieter layer of the story. She is part of the family left to carry the human reality behind the public memory. After Val's death, the world could return to the familiar images: Iceman, Doc Holliday, Jim Morrison, Batman. But families do not grieve an image first. They grieve a person. They inherit not only the legacy, but also the questions that come with it. What should be preserved? What should be protected? How much of a person belongs to the public after they are gone? Those questions became even more complicated because Val Kilmer's final years were connected not only to illness and cinema, but also to technology. Digital voice work, AI-assisted recreations, and later discussions about his likeness opened a new and uneasy chapter. For the public, it could feel like a fascinating story about innovation. For a family, it carried a different weight. Consent, memory, dignity, and love all sit inside those decisions. That is why the family line should not be treated as a side note. It is the place where the story stops being about a star and becomes about a man whose voice had to be carried, guarded, and interpreted by others. There is a tenderness in that, but there is also a sadness. Kilmer had spent years building characters out of voice, body, timing, and control. He knew how to transform himself, He knew how to disappear into another man's rhythm. But in the later years, the transformation was no longer chosen for a role. It was forced by illness, and the people close to him had to meet him there, not as the public remembered him, but as he was. That is a different kind of love. Not the glamorous love Hollywood sells, not the romance of red carpets and famous names. A more difficult love, a love that listens when speech is hard, a love that helps translate without taking over, a love that understands that a changed voice is not an absent person, and that is why Jack's narration in Val matters so much. It gives the audience a way to hear Val Kilmer, without pretending the loss did not happen. The world had known Kilmer through characters who wore masks, uniforms, sunglasses, leather jackets, capes, and legends. His family knew the man underneath all of that. And in the end, when the old voice could no longer carry the story by itself, it was the people closest to him who helped make sure the story did not go silent. But family was only one part of the return. Because once technology entered the story, Val Kilmer's voice became more than a private wound. It became a question Hollywood is still learning how to answer. The strange thing about Val Kilmer's final public chapter is that it did not belong only to the past. It belonged to the future. For most Hollywood legends, the last act is built from memory. Old films are restored. Interviews are replayed. Younger actors name them as influences. Fans return to the roles that made them feel something years earlier. The person is gone, or older, or far from the spotlight, and the legacy becomes a kind of museum, beautiful, fixed, protected behind glass. But Val Kilmer's legacy did not settle that easily. Because his story ended at the exact moment Hollywood was beginning to ask a more unsettling question. If technology can recreate a face, a voice, a presence, then where does the actor end? For Kilmer, that question was never abstract. After throat cancer changed his speech, digital voice technology became part of his attempt to communicate with the world again. He worked with voice technology that tried to recreate elements of the sound illness had taken from him. It was not magic. It was not a perfect resurrection of the young man from Top Gun, and it should not be treated like a cheap miracle. But emotionally, the idea was powerful. A man who had built his career through voice, silence, timing, and presence was now reaching toward technology to recover a piece of himself. That is the part of the story that feels both beautiful and uneasy. Beautiful, because technology offered a form of return, a way for Kilmer's words to be heard with something closer to the voice audiences remembered. A way for the man behind the damaged speech to step forward without being reduced to the damage. Uneasy, because every recreation carries a question. Who is speaking? The person? The machine? The memory of the person? The family that gives permission? The company that builds the tool? The audience that wants so badly to believe the voice is back? With Val Kilmer, those questions matter because his voice was not just a technical feature. It was part of his emotional signature. The clipped confidence of Iceman. The dangerous rhythm of Jim Morrison. The elegant decay of Doc Holliday. The controlled darkness of Bruce Wayne. His performances had taught audiences to listen for something behind the words. So when the world heard about efforts to recreate or assist his voice, it was not just a story about technology. It was a story about identity. And then came Top Gun, Maverick. The scene between Maverick and Iceman could have been simple fan service. It could have been a nostalgic cameo designed only to make the audience remember 1986. But it became something heavier because the real Val Kilmer was present inside the fiction. The character was ill. The actor had been ill. The conversation was brief. The emotion was held back. And somehow that restraint made it more devastating. The film did not need to explain everything. The audience understood enough. They saw Tom Cruise looking at Val Kilmer, and they were not only seeing Maverick and Iceman. They were seeing time. They were seeing friendship shaped by cinema and age. They were seeing two versions of Hollywood standing across from each other, one still moving at impossible speed, the other carrying the cost of survival in his face, his body, and his voice. That was the twist hidden inside the comeback. Iceman had returned, but not as the same untouchable figure. He returned as proof that even legends change. The silence that once made him seem superior now made him seem human. The limited speech that could have been treated as weakness became the emotional center of the scene. The old rivalry had softened into recognition, and the man who had once been remembered for icy control was now remembered for the courage of appearing without pretending time had not touched him. That is why the scene mattered beyond Top Gun. It changed the way people looked back at Val Kilmer. Suddenly, the old performances carried new echoes. Doc Holliday's failing body in Tombstone felt different. Jim Morrison's voice in The Doors felt different. Bruce Wayne's mask in Batman Forever felt different. Even Iceman's cool distance in the original Top Gun felt different, because now the audience knew the man behind that image would one day have to fight for the very thing that made performance possible. This is what a real legacy does. It does not stay still. It changes when the life behind it becomes clearer. For years, Kilmer had been remembered in fragments: the movie star, the beautiful rebel, the difficult actor, the scene stealer, the Batman who only wore the suit once. The Doc Holliday many fans never forgot. But after his illness, after Val, after Maverick, and after his death, those fragments began to arrange themselves into a different portrait. Not a saint, not a victim, not a misunderstood genius in the simple, flattering way people sometimes use after someone is gone. Something more human than that. A performer who wanted control and lost it. A man who could be hard to categorize and suffered from being categorized too easily. An actor whose beauty sometimes distracted from his craft. A star whose reputation sometimes drowned out his vulnerability. A father whose words were carried by his son. A voice that changed but did not vanish. And the future of his image remains complicated. After his death, reports of authorized AI-generated appearances raised the same difficult questions his final years had already suggested. If an actor's face or voice can continue after the actor is gone, then legacy is no longer only memory. It becomes a decision, a responsibility, a negotiation between love, art, technology, permission, and public desire. Val Kilmer's story sits directly in the center of that unease. Because audiences wanted to hear him again, and because wanting that is understandable. But the longing to recover a voice must always be held beside the dignity of the person who owned it. That is the reframe his life leaves behind. Val Kilmer was not important only because he played famous roles. He was important because those roles now reveal something about the cost of becoming an image. Hollywood turned him into coolness, danger, beauty, arrogance, and mystery. Illness forced the world to see fragility where it had once seen only control. Technology offered one kind of return, but not the return of the untouched young star. Something more honest appeared instead. A changed man, a changed voice, a legend no longer protected by perfection. And maybe that is why, in the end, Val Kilmer's final years did not make his screen image smaller. They made it deeper. They gave the old roles a shadow the audience could not have seen when he was young. They turned Iceman from a symbol of invulnerability into something much more painful and much more lasting. A reminder that even the coolest man in the room was always human. In the end, Val Kilmer's story does not rest in the easy places. Not only in the fighter jet, not only in the cape, not only in the Western drawl, the rock star swagger, the sharp smile of a young rival who seemed to know he had already won the scene before anyone else opened his mouth. Those images remain. They always will. But they are not the whole of him. The older Val Kilmer asks something different from the audience. He asks us to look past the perfect still frame, past the myth of the difficult star, past the beautiful face Hollywood knew how to sell, past the roles that made him seem untouchable. He asks us to sit with a more uncomfortable truth, that the body changes, the voice changes, and sometimes the thing that made a performer powerful becomes the very place where life leaves its deepest mark. For a long time, audiences remembered Iceman as a symbol of control. Cool, competitive, unshaken. But after Val Kilmer's later years, that image can never mean only that again. The silence has changed. The pause has changed. The look has changed. The man behind it became visible in a way youth and fame had once hidden. That is what makes his final return so moving. He did not come back as a star untouched by time. He came back carrying time with him. He came back with illness in the room, with history in the room, with the memory of the young man and the reality of the older man standing side by side. And because the film did not try to erase that, the moment became larger than nostalgia. It became a farewell. Not a loud one, not the kind Hollywood usually designs. No grand speech, no desperate attempt to pretend the past could be restored. Just a brief meeting, a changed voice, a familiar face, and the quiet understanding that some legends become more powerful when the illusion finally falls away. Val Kilmer spent much of his career playing men who hid behind masks of one kind or another, the sunglasses of Iceman, the mythology of Jim Morrison, the wit of Doc Holliday, the suit of Batman, the professional calm of men who could not afford to show fear. Again and again, he found characters who were performing strength while something more fragile lived beneath it. Maybe that is why his own life now feels inseparable from those roles. Because the final image of Val Kilmer is not only the actor as Hollywood first wanted him, it is the actor after the glamour, after the labels, after the illness, after the voice had changed. It is a man still trying to be heard. Through his son, through old footage, through technology, through the audience's memory, through the strange afterlife that cinema gives to faces and voices long after the body is gone. He died at 65, but his image did not stop moving. It keeps returning in pieces, a smirk in Top Gun, a haunted stare in The Doors, a dying joke in Tombstone, a masked loneliness in Batman Forever, a wordless tenderness in Top Gun, Maverick. Each one now carries a little more weight than it did before. Because now we know what came later. We know that the voice audiences remembered was not something permanent. We know that the coolness was only one layer. We know that the man inside the image had to fight, not just to survive, but to keep some part of himself audible. And maybe that is the real legacy, not perfection, not innocence, not a simple redemption story. A changed voice that still found a way to reach people. A movie star who became more human when the movie star image could no longer protect him. A legend whose silence, in the end, spoke louder than anyone expected. If you want to keep uncovering the human stories behind Hollywood's brightest legends, stay with Hollywood Legends.